Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I just wanted to let you guys know that you are in fact getting the most premium topics that we discussed in our pre-show discussion. We always talk about a range of things about what we're going to talk about today. And there's something that we'd very much like to talk about, but unfortunately we don't have a lot to share on it, so I'm just going to flag it for you, something you can read about more if you're interested. South Korea, which is of course a very important country, I think, for South Africa, because it shows us what a country that's mired in poverty can do if it gets its act together, is about to have an election. And South Korean politics it can be a pretty rough place sometimes, especially compared to a lot of other countries that are similarly developed. And unfortunately, we're seeing the latest example of this, which is that South Korea is having the leader of the ruling party, the Liberal Party in South Korea, got hit on the head by a guy with a hammer. He's in hospital. The guy was wearing traditional robes, and it's making what's already been a pretty bitter election much worse. So anyway, that's something to check into if you want to. I'm joined today, of course, on the show by Mr. Chris Hattingh. Chris, how you doing, man?
Oh, Nicholas, well, thanks for that first news item. That's really picked up my Monday. So I can't speak for Gabriel, but I'm very keen now to get into the rest of the topics and the news of the week.
And of course, we have Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you?
Oh man, my favorite South country other than South Africa is no. They'll be fine.
Well, the competition's not strong there. It's South Africa, South Sudan, and South Korea.
And there's a clear ranking in my mind.
I think most people would agree on that ranking.
There's the book written by the South Korean ambassador to South Africa. Well, it's hard to point at anyway. Reimagining African development in the Korean model, not the communist model, the really good Korean model. Tribute to that.
Yes, because people from North Korea don't tend to write too many books unless they're about the dear leader himself. Anyway, okay, let us get into the first news story for today. And starting off Monday, at Gabriel's suggestion, we're going to start, in fact, with a win. Who says it's all doom and gloom on the Daily Friend Show? It is, in fact, a glorious day in some ways. And that is because, well, there's been some news on the Coronavirus Command Council and the state of disaster. Gabriel, what exactly is going on and why is it a win?
Okay, so at the end of last week, Health Minister Joe Phaahla announced that the Command Council has been extended for the last time. There's a little bit of ambiguity, so it's not clear if he means there's going to be another extension on March 15th. It seems like what he means is that the extension that's taken place is not going to be renewed. This matters because it returns parliamentary oversight. It allows the initiation of genuine parliamentary scrutiny, parliamentary questions, and so on, into the fiscal operations of the Command Council. So a lot of emergency procurement took place at their behest. We've had signals coming from the ministry itself to the effect that tens, if not hundreds of billions of rands worth of procurement might be shady. That can get a second level of analysis coming from opposition politicians that just ask simple questions but have to be answered. And you can sort of trap people in contradictions if they're not careful, so they have to produce their answers. And it's a boring process, but it is part of the process that we need to go through in order to, as it were, get back the money and get accountability to go beyond Dr. Zweli Mkhize, who was certainly not the only person involved in shady business during the plague. The more immediate issue, however, is that, of course, as all South Africans know, we have been ruled over for nearly 2 years by an actual command council, by a unit of executive superpower that exists in a parliamentary blind spot, which has the ability to make the law and has made extremely irrational and harmful laws, banning cigarettes with no scientific basis of a connection between that and anything positive, open-toed shoes, bikinis, police running up and down the beach, 50 people being killed by the police in the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks of this thing. Since then, the police not really enforcing the rules accepting in sort of bourgeois beachy places, introducing a sort of arbitrariness, bootlegging alcohol becoming a major industry, creating dark money that's hidden from the tax collector, but also that helps criminal networks. It's been a great build up to the July riots. I don't think that one can properly understand the scope and ferocity of those riots without the backdrop of the Command Council. And that all is still relatively academic and minor compared to the 2 million job losses that have taken place under the Command Council. And those are jobs that are not looking like they're coming back. The way to get them back, and they have to come back, and more jobs have to be created, is to return transparency, accountability, proper constitutional norms. And the way to do that, first step, is to get rid of the Command Council. Now, we at the Institute of Race Relations campaigns team, and here we are, the full team, Chris and myself, have been running a campaign since October last year. We were the first to launch a petition to disband the Command Council. People had tried in July of 2020 to get rid of the thing through technical legal measures. That did not work. We went to the South African people. We said it is going to be up to you as citizens to stand up and be counted. Yes, in other countries there have been protests in the streets, and sometimes they've been messy and sometimes they've been ugly. We did not encourage that. We didn't get in the way of that. If people wanted to do that, we would have addressed that. What we encouraged was the only thing that, this simple mechanism of putting your signature to a well thought out petition to end the state of disaster, disband the Command Council, change the Disaster Management Act so that we never get into this position again. And for us then to go in a fashion where police brutality can't get involved, but where those signatures can get involved, take them to the president, apply the pressure, make it public, get on TV, radio, and all kinds of other platforms to show all of the scientific evidence that contradicts the positions of the disaster of the Command Council and the Department of Health. We did all of that work, and it's come to fruition. I mean, I'll just finish by saying, bizarrely, this year I just did a tally. Every time we did a press release on the Command Council, within the next 2 days, the Department of Health made an announcement. So in the middle of last week, we drew attention to every major media organization in the country and various organs of state that the balance of the trend has turned very heavily against disaster management style procedures, mandates, and so on. Mask mandates being repealed in a dozen countries. We referred to a few of them, most conspicuously France, where one of the most aggressive impositions of mandates in the world under Emmanuel Macron, president who said that he was willing to emmerde his own citizens, put them in the SHIT, literally, that he didn't consider people to be French citizens unless they got in line with the mandates. He has completely turned around that position 1 month before an election. Why? Because when politicians feel the heat of public pressure, they show respect to basic rights. It is when citizens get complacent and allow politicians to operate in their own universe that common sense disappears, totalitarian impositions strengthen, and eventually one finds oneself in a position too weak to push back. But the good news is we did push back. We were joined by many others. We really celebrate the tens of thousands of South Africans who signed on to the IRR's campaign. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the fight's not over. We will continue to pursue avenues to make sure that the Disaster Management Act changes so that this can't happen again. We will continue to apply scrutiny to whatever laws are introduced through ordinary procedures. There will have to be public consultation processes about banning stadiums, despite the fact that around the world stadiums are in business in South Africa, and so on and so forth. We will be fighting for the tourism industry as we were in the build-up to last year. We will be looking at the science. We will be exposing those studies which embarrass the totalitarians who want to tell you how to live your life morning, noon, and night. We will stick to the facts, and we will continue to hope for your support. So thank you.
Chris, anything to add?
Only to reinforce Gabriel's point about public participation. I know it's often overwhelming, and the flood of irrational, economically unsound regulations is overwhelming, but that's, I think, a great credit to the IRR and the campaign's work, especially where we form part of South Africa's strong civil society, and a big part of that, we form a very big pillar of that because of our principles and our commitment to the tenets of classical liberalism. So that'll inform the work that we continue doing and the accountability that we try and enforce on politicians, and we can only do that with the public's support in various ways. So I will only reinforce what Gabriel said about supporting the IRR's work. It's vitally important to us, and we do this because we believe in this kind of South Africa. So please continue supporting the IRR in whatever way you can.
Indeed. We are, at the end of the day, more funded. I believe I'm correct in saying by people who watch the show and people of a like mind than we are by any sort of donor or company or anything like that. So your guys' support on many levels is important, not just on our petitions and stuff, but also through finance.
Also,
Anyway.
your likes. Nick doesn't do this a lot, and since I'm doing the hard sell here, and maybe I sound too impassioned, but I really believe in this. But just the likes, the taking in the information, sharing it around, counts for a lot too. Ultimately, people matter, and what matters most about people is what our opinions are. Is that we get informed and that we get our act together, to protect a free space where curiosity and frivolity and all the delicious things of life get to be cherished and furnished rather than sort of squished away.
I want to use the phrase "the delicious things of life" more often. I think it's a very good one. All right, so let us move on to our next topic for today, and this is a think piece or an opinion piece that appeared in Eyewitness News this morning. It's written by Makashule Ghana, who is, I believe, the DA spokesperson for economic development in the Hattingh legislature. I may need to double check that, but I think that's his title. And in this piece, Ghana talks about how we've got these serious problems of things like youth unemployment, high levels of crime, lawlessness. And he says that in the townships in particular, the economy has been taken over by foreigners. He cites some studies, and he says that foreign owned businesses are using sort of clan-based systems to give themselves an advantage over South Africans who are operating their own in the same space. And that this is a big problem, and it's very bad that if anyone takes it into their own hands to go and attack these people. But South Africans should still try to get rid of these businesses by arguing by not buying from businesses that are not South African owned. So basically, he suggests that sort of local businesses will have stickers or accreditation or something outside that says, this is a South African owned business, and then people should, in effect, boycott foreign owned businesses and buy only from South African businesses. Chris, let's start with you. What do you make of this argument?
I can talk a bit about, I guess, the macroeconomic points and a fallacy or an assumption at play, not necessarily only in this case, but a lot of the rhetoric now around foreign businesses and workers in South Africa. You see this with a new plan now put out by the Department of Labor with job reservation. So the assumption that the number of jobs is fixed, that it's up to a state, maybe it could be the president, it could be the Minister of Labor, it could be the Coronavirus Command Council, a few enlightened bureaucrats and politicians who have the knowledge and insight to understand how many jobs there can be in a country at any one point, and that they should allocate accordingly. And they've got the levers of the economy in front of them, and they can press that button and take that person out there. It's sort of like a Sims kind of vibe going on, Sim City kind of thing. To play devil's advocate, when economic freedom is declining, as is the case in South Africa and has been the case, and it only matters who you know in politics, not the product you can produce in the service, it is the case that the number of jobs can become fixed, and you see interest groups vying with each other to control the levers of power, and then they can ensure that laws are set up in their favor, that regulations punish others, for example, foreigners or other groups, sort of groups who are scapegoated, and benefits others. So I don't think it's a surprise that this rhetoric is increasing, and that these sorts of policy formulations are happening more and more and more, because it's very zero sum. It assumes that only the state can decide how the economy should operate, and because there's a limited number of jobs, only politicians should have that power. At the end of the day, it's not going to solve any issues that one might have with South Africa's immigration framework, immigration policies. It comes across, I think, from my reading, as very short-termist and trying to gain sort of interest and votes now in the now. But it'll be both economically unsound in the long run, because foreigners, when they come to the country, create jobs downstream, might not be in their own business immediately, but there's more investment, more capital, more goods and services. It all stimulates economic activity, and just morally, it's going to increase social tensions in the country. So all in all, I think pretty negative and simply economically unfeasible.
Gabriel, this is a topic you've looked into a bit. I believe that one of the first pieces of work you did with the Institute of Race Relations was looking into us and shop owners, that kind of stuff. Could you talk a little bit about that, and also your thoughts on what Ghana's written here?
Yeah, thank you. So 2017, 2018, sort of around that period, I did a 3-month project with Rian Malan for the Institute of Race Relations. And so we spent a lot of time reading. Look, if you want to just know the best place to read about this question, all questions to do with migration into South Africa, the South African Migration Project, SAMP, like Samp and Beans. SAMP is amazing. It's run out of a university in Canada, and they produce very regular reports. They do original research. They compile other research. It's a great database to get into. And what you're going to find if you consult that database closely enough, amongst other things, is that it's very hard to say how many foreigners there are in South Africa. New York Times estimated that there were 4 million, and then they were accused of basically being xenophobe themselves, so they dropped it to 1 million. But if you look at the best data that there is, it really is an open question, because we have absurdly open borders, in my view, and that should be addressed. But you'll also find, as Chris has said very, very clearly, that the net economic effect is a gain of economic activity and of jobs. Foreigners create more jobs than they take. Why? Predominantly because we get working age foreigners that come and join the economy. South Africa, in fact, is extraordinary. In the world, it's one of like 5 countries on record where the foreigner unemployment rate is lower than the local unemployment rate. And in fact, I think at this stage, it's 1/10 of the sort of local unemployment rate. So foreigners in South Africa are employed almost at the rate that Americans are employed in America, sort of at a fairly effective labor absorption position. Because otherwise, they've got nothing to fall back on. There's not a grant system for them to easily fall back on. As far as I can tell, I was speaking to some people over the weekend whose domestic staff and farming staff had just gone back over the border because they couldn't get healthcare in South Africa, because whether on paper they're allowed it or not, it just doesn't get rolled out. So that in terms of the cost benefit, there will be some strain on schools and hospitals and so on. But the net benefit is, the benefit outweighs the costs in terms of just tax revenue that's created through VAT and so on. That's the first sort of macro point, and you can go and find that substantiated. I wasn't sure what to think about it, and that report summarizes the evidence. And there are other places to do that too. I think let's drill it down to like a human level, though, like an individual level. We found in a couple of weeks of like cruising around the CBD, Hillbrow, Soweto, it took a long time before we found a locally operated spaza type business. Guy's called Jabu. He was actually running a liquor store in Soweto. And next door, but connected in the same building, there was a spaza shop. But that was actually being operated by Bangladeshis. He was subletting the space to the Bangladeshis, and they were selling the sweeties and nappies and cigarettes and so on. And he was selling the booze. He said his estimate was that 95% of the spaza shops in Soweto are being run by foreigners, but that all of the liquor stores are being run by locals. Why? Because you need a license to run a liquor store. And and to get a license, you need a cop who's going to approve that. And so that's the sort of difference. We said, why aren't you also running your own spaza shop? He said he was. His son had been running it. He wanted to train his son in business to eventually take over the family business. He also owned like a 4-bedroom little hotel, bed and breakfast type thing. He was a man of business, making some money, working it hard, making some money. His son stole from him, so he sent his son away to the hinterland to go and stay with Gogo and get some discipline, the old-fashioned way. The son came back, and a year later stole from him again. And then again, I said, how unusual is this? He says, this is a fundamental problem. The younger generation has taken in the logic of people like Malema, that life is about what you get. It's not about what you put in. That was his estimate. But we confronted exactly, and it's an anecdote, and I'm not suggesting you extrapolate too much from it, but there it is. We confronted the question about what is the competitive advantage that foreign spaza shop owners have. We were in consultation with Gigi Alcock, the author of Casinomics, a sort of very, very important and interesting kind of dude in the township economy space. And we noticed that, when we asked people the question, we just kept getting the same answer. Why are these foreign businesses performing well? If you ask the insiders who are really competing with them or who were taken out of business by them, the guys who really know them closely, they say the same thing over and over again. They give interest, they give loans without interest. They don't drink, so their living costs are lower. They don't eat anything nice. They just live extremely cheaply. They usually live in their shop, behind their shop, under their shop. They nip it at the margins. And so they are able to outcompete with 5 cents, 10 cents undercutting in prices of the other spaza shops. And that the township spaza shop space was very interesting. Those spaza shops were outcompeting, big retail spaces that thought they could do the best. Spaza spaces came in, but the foreign spazas came in and undercut them even further. And the sort of the Islamic or very Coptic Christian traditions both seem to play an important role there in terms of the no interest on rent and also the no drinking and also the sort of the discipline maintained in the household. That is also a business. That's part of it. And then you say, well, what about the story that they're all kind of in cahoots? I mean, this is what Garner claims. He claims that they are not actually small businesses because they don't own themselves. Well, it is true that none of those spaza shops almost none of them own the spaces that they're in, because mostly they rent out RDP homes, which themselves are not owned by the almost entirely black people who live in former townships, because our awful continuation of apartheid ANC government refuses to hand out title deeds. So people get RDP houses. They don't want to live in the RDP house because it's rubbish. They live in a nicer house. They rent it out to a foreigner who sets a spaza shop up there. So there is a lack of ownership problem, but it's not the one that Garner describes. Insofar as the question is, do those foreigners own their own little businesses? Entirely they do, is what we found. But what we did find is in the supply chain, if you go back one step to a spazaret or a local distribution point, you will find places in Soweto that link the little spaza shops to big China City, which is one of the main distribution hubs. And they will be doing something like R1 million turnover a day in basic supplies, corn, maize, nappies, milk, both fresh and not, bread as well. So they have managed to plug into the sort of formal economy distribution center vibe. And then from there, it gets reticulated into these smaller businesses. And so there you do have fairly large conglomerates. But what I found hanging out with all of those spaza shop people, whether they were Ethiopians, whether they were Bangladeshis, whether they were Somalis, or whether they were South Africans, and Jabu introduced me to one South African who was running a spaza shop business, is that they all sit on their phones all day. And Chris, how wonderful is this? As a dude who knows how markets should work. You know why they're sitting on their phones all day? To hear where they can buy bread for 5 cents less per loaf. Today, it's that one. And then they all figure out, can we get a bucky? Let's all, okay, buddy, we'll hire the bucky together. They'll come and we'll get this much bread and this much Coca-Cola, and then we'll bring it back. And we, in that day, that person will have made a 200 Rand savings on their daily order, by sitting on their phone and staying abreast of the information. And that, ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, is how they undercut Oaks at Checkers and Spar and so on, who have the kinds of economies of scale that would make you think it is impossible to buy a tomato cheaper at a spaza shop than it is at one of those big places, when actually the opposite is true. It is often cheaper to buy in spaza shops, notwithstanding the extra benefit that you get from not having to pay the taxi fare to get back and forth. So when the stuff gets burnt down, you ask locals what they think, and they say, this is how you can see the wisdom of a gogo compared to the foolishness of a young man. Because when the young man goes to burn down the local foreign spaza shop, the gogo says, don't do that. Tomorrow you will suffer. And the young man says, no, tomorrow I'll get a job. And tomorrow comes and he doesn't have a job, and he also doesn't have any pup or gravy or even a Coca-Cola to wash away his flippin' misery. Believe the gogos. The gogos believe that if you're getting the nappies for cheaper, it's better. Whether you're buying from a foreigner or a local, doesn't matter. Just try and penny pinch. That's how poor South Africans are making it. I value that. I respect it. I think Ghana should think about it.
Right. I think that this is kind of a bit weird. I think he's very deliberately trying to appeal to poor Black South Africans who are living in townships, right? That seems to be the vote segment he's trying to encourage to vote from here. And yet he's basically saying, don't buy from the shops which give you food for cheaper. Chris, final thoughts on this one before we move on?
Yeah, just to say, let's presume that the policy from the Labour Department gets implemented as is, or its worst version, to say in this sector, in Soweto, in that industry, can only be this number of people of this citizenship or from that country or this race or that gender, whatever. Let's presume that happens. None of this is going to change the policies in place in South Africa that prevent much more economic activity, investment, job creation, all of that stuff. I mean, none of it is going to free South Africa from the monopoly that is Eskom. None of it is going to free South Africa from bailouts for SAA. None of it is going to free South Africa from localization plans that increase the cost of imported goods and inputs that again affect poor to middle income consumers the most. So it really shifts the target of what the most of us, I think, what most South Africans want and want to push towards, which is better policies and more pro economic activity and pro business policies, which we all need to keep fighting for. I think it takes way too much energy and analysis and sort of just grit away from that work that we need to be doing, which would in the long run unlock much more job opportunities for South Africans included.
Right. And I wonder if we will see more of this kind of argument coming from the national levels of the DA, or whether this is particular to the Honourable Ghana. All right. Let us very briefly move on to our last topic, because we don't have a lot of time. Of course, as we talked about a lot last week, as I'm sure everyone knows, big war going on in Europe right now. There are many knock-on effects from this and the sanctions that are connected to it. But one of them is perhaps some speculation that the price of coal is about to shoot through the roof. And South Africa, as being a country which sits on an absolutely enormous amount of coal, could potentially be in a place to take a lot of advantage of this. But an editorial in Business Live suggests that our potential commodities boom is somewhat limited. Chris, do you want to just explain that very briefly?
Yeah, just basically the country's rail and port operations and networks have been declining so much for the last 10 years that you can't take advantage of getting more exports out of the country. So now, for example, with Russia and Ukraine, the Eurozone is South Africa's biggest export market, especially in terms of citrus and fruit. It's not going to help that we have more to export if we can't actually get stuff out of the country. We might use neighboring countries, but our ports and rail can't support that. So just last year, the Minerals Council estimated that South Africa lost out on 30 billion rand worth of export sales. So just put that in context. I mean, and the jobs that could have been created, the more long-term investment that could have happened. If we don't get the basic operational points right, the low-hanging fruit, I think, in trade reform, then, I mean, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. And we talk about localization and all that stuff and reindustrializing and increasing South Africa's manufacturing base. none of that is going to happen without having the sound fundamentals in place. So unfortunately, it looks like South Africa, we've been afforded some fiscal room, obviously, with the latest commodities boom. But if another one happens now, I don't think we'll be able to really ride that for very long.
Indeed. Anyway, that is all the time we have for this episode. So thank you very much for listening. Please check out thedailyfriend.co.za. Also remember to subscribe to our channel and like this video. We'd really appreciate that. Anyway, thank you very much. And we'll see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.